All right, good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. This is the regular meeting of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. It is Thursday, January 26, 2023. Ms. Linker, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Baker?
Here.
Commissioner Wilson?
Here.
Commissioner Wood?
Here.
Chair Matich?
Here. All right, good morning, everybody. We'll begin with a couple opening remarks. The first is I was informed recently that unfortunately Dr. Gomez is resigning his position on the commission. He was the Attorney General's most recent appointee. That resignation is effective immediately, and so we will have one vacancy on the commission until we receive a successor appointment. So we certainly appreciate Dr. Gomez's service during his time here and look forward to his replacement. The second housekeeping matter, we'll be talking about this more throughout the meeting as we talk about some changes to the enforcement division that we'll be considering today. But as part of that, we're undergoing some reorganization. And as part of that process, Angela Brereton has returned to the assistant chief position, and we will be recruiting a new chief of enforcement going forward. With that, we'll proceed to item 2, approval of the commission minutes. Do we have any edits or comments on the November 2022 commission hearing minutes? Hearing and seeing none, do we have a motion to approve?
Move the adoption of the minutes.
Second.
Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wood?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
We'll proceed to item number 3, approval of the December 2022 commission hearing minutes. Do any commissioners have edits or comments on the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, do we have a motion to approve?
Okay, I'll move the adoption of the minutes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wood?
I wasn't there, so I don't know if I should vote on this one.
You can abstain if you would like.
I'll abstain.
All right.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right. Thank you. All right. Moving to our consent calendar, which is items 4 through 11 today. And I would note for the commissioner's benefit that also includes item 11, which is our proposed regulatory calendar for next year. So not exclusively enforcement matters today. Having said that, do any commissioners wish to pull an item from the consent calendar for separate discussion? Commissioner Baker.
I may have jumped the gun on Commissioner Wood, but I for 5 and 6, please.
5 and 6. Commissioner Wood.
And I'd like to pull 11, please.
All right. Commissioner Wilson.
No.
No. All right. All right. So the consent count, the remaining matters on consent are items 4, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Any commissioner comments on those matters? Hearing and seeing none. Do we have any public comment on items 4, 7, 8, 9, or 10? That's our consent calendar for today. Hearing and seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar items?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wood?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, let's proceed to item 5. This is in the matter of William Dodd, FPPC number 19439. Presenting for us today is Assistant Chief of Enforcement, Chris Burton. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners.
Mr. Burton, do you have any opening comments for this matter before we move to commissioner questions or comments?
I do not have any particular comments. I'm happy to answer the questions of the Commission.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Baker, why don't you go ahead and lead us off? You asked to have this one pulled.
Thank you. Really a relatively small question. It's for my understanding, twice in the stipulation there's a reference to the cause of the delay in the reporting being clerical error on one part, and the other part was delay in getting information from the third parties. Can you, since it's in the four corners of the stipulation, can you share more about what was the nature of the clerical error?
I don't have any specific details as to the clerical error at issue in this particular case. I think generally use of that term indicates it's a nice way of saying that someone messed up due to a staffing issue, perhaps, or just an error in the process. And I think in this case, given the fact that many of the statements were only a couple months late, that it's more evident that it makes more sense that there would just be a clerical error, essentially maybe turnover of staff or something like that. So generally, I think when you see that term, that's what it refers to. But as to the specific case, I don't have anything further to add.
Understood. It's it's more just frankly for the benefit of what keeps the behest payment from happening. As you noted, the reporting did happen just within a few months. I guess that leads to my next question, and that is it looks like the reporting that needed to happen happened within a few months, and we're a couple years down the road. Can you, and I realize you're kind of in this spot with a relatively recent change. Are you able to elaborate on why this wasn't one case that maybe within a year could have come to us to resolve? And there's lots of reasons why that can happen, but given how much we're talking about enforcement reforms today, I wonder if you can address why once the reporting happened a few months later, we're a couple of years down the road here.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Because I have to stay within the four corners of the stipulation, I can't necessarily speak to any particular delay in this case, but generally there's various reasons for why a case might take longer than originally anticipated or longer than others. It could be due to the nature of the investigation. There could be delays in the investigation due to a need to subpoena records, which can be a drawn-out process, especially if the witnesses are uncooperative and perhaps challenge the subpoena. We always have staff turnover, which can significantly delay things. For example, if you have a case with an attorney who leaves enforcement, then that case needs to go to another attorney who then has to catch up on everything. So that's another potential cause for delay. Really, an inability to work every single case at the same time. Because of our caseloads, we do have to prioritize different types of cases, such as those that are close to the statute of limitations, or perhaps involve a pre-election issue. That's another reason. We were impacted a bit by COVID in terms of response times and more extended staff absences and that sort of thing. So those generally are, I think, some of the reasons why a case might take longer to bring to resolution for enforcement.
Can I just add a clarifying point?
Sure.
All of those things you mentioned, are any of those things specific to this case?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Commissioner Baker, anything further on this?
That answers those are my questions. And the reason I pulled this is I wanted to understand a clerical error and just, from one commissioner's point of view, that when a case, whatever compliance was required appears to have happened, those might be, again, I realize I don't understand all the circumstances that could cause delay. Those might be the ones that can come forward to us sooner rather than a couple of years down the road. And as we look for ways in which to be clearing some of the backlog. But I thank you. That was the question I had regarding this. I leave it to the chair and other commissioners if you have other comments or questions.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is I noticed that this case arose from a filing officer referral. Who is the filing officer here?
In this case, Mr. Dodd was a member of the California State Senate, so I believe it is the FPPC as the filing officer for Form 803s.
So we've referred this to ourselves.
Yes, we do get referrals from our, I'm not sure which division it is, but yes, we do get referrals from our own agency.
All right. Just as a suggestion in the future, actually more of a direction, if it's a referral from our own agency, can we just say that as opposed to the more generic, ambiguous statement from a filing officer? Not everyone knows that the Senate and
Sure.
Assembly file with us, that we serve as their filing officers.
We can do that.
The second question I have is, were these counts required legally under the regulation to be excluded from Streamline?
No, they were not. This case was excluded from Streamline for two different reasons. Number one, it was determined that due to the sheer number of behested payments, that the public harm was more than minimal. There was one particular behested payment report which also exceeded the financial threshold. So,
Which one was that?
Give me 1 second to look at the chart.
And I will, this may help because maybe it's my mistake, but I thought the threshold was 150,000 and the highest amount I saw here in a single amount was 120.
Right. So we when we're looking at the behested payment reports, we look at not the individual payments, but the individual report. So if there were numerous behested payments made on the same day and that report was due on the same day, then we consider that one behested payment report. So in this case, the one that exceeded the threshold was essentially an aggregation of multiple contributions. I think it's the report that would have been due for the payments that were made on December 11th, 2017.
Okay. So then, going back to my question, is what you're saying you had to pull this out of Streamline, or did you still have discretion to keep it in Streamline?
We had to put it on Streamline due to the regulation, which provides the $150,000 threshold.
Okay, cool. Appreciate that. Just want to make sure I clarified that. The second direction I want to give to you on this particular matter is, I think that when you use terms like clerical error, it's important that staff is either able to put some gloss on that when we ask and not take the position that, well, it just says clerical error, four corners, I can't say anything more. If you're going to say clerical error, then you have to have something in here that gives us a little meat in the bones. Because I will tell you, I read it in context with the other statement that clerical error and the need to rely on third parties to track necessary information, which gets back to something the commission talked about, and we actually adopted regulations, as you know, recently, recognizing that that's a problem for public officials. And so without knowing the answer to the clerical error, if that was because they had a hard time getting the information, then that's actually consistent with some good faith estimate regulations we just adopted. If it's something else, then, I mean, we would like to know that. At least I would like to know that. So just in the future, commissioners read these closely. So we like detail. And I recognize that are negotiated documents, but still, we're going to ask these questions.
I appreciate that comment, and we'll take that in mind going forward.
And then I guess my final comment is I think that staff did a very good job here coming up with the correct fine amount. Because to me, and again, I will reference the commission's most recent action on behested payments, recognizing that due to the statutory construct, public officials are put in an oftentimes untenable position of having to rely on a third party to get the information. What the commission is really worried about is when the behested payments are being made by people with business before the public official, which could be a way to curry influence, or whether the recipient of a behested payment is a family member. And drawing the analogy between this case and the Ramsey case, I think really highlights what's important to the commission in terms of behested payments, what we think are kind of the most egregious violations. So I think even though the total amount not reported here is relatively large, I think the other factors are appropriately support the fine amount recommended by staff here. So for my part, I think staff did a good job coming up with the fine amount here. So do other commissioners have any additional comments?
Chair Matich, I had a couple additional questions, but
Yeah, please.
in your questions, you covered that. But in the stipulation, Assistant Chief Burton, on page 7, there's a reference to that Mr. Dodd made a good faith effort to file the reports in question. And do you have criteria in terms of what good faith means from your perspective? I mean, it's clear what the term means, but is there any criteria or checklist that you go through, or is it just based on how responsive the individual is who's charged, or
Right.
what's your basic process for making that assessment?
Thank you for your question. I don't think good faith used in our documents necessarily is a defined term. I think it can be used a number of ways, but in this case in particular, I think what that's going towards is the fact that even though they were having issues getting information from the payors, they worked as quickly as possible to get that information and then file those reports as timely as possible. And I think you see that in the fact that even though these were late, they were only, a couple months late on average, I believe. So I think that's what the good faith language is going towards in this case. But to answer your question, no, we do not have specific criteria for that, applying that term in a case.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
All right. Any other, Commissioner Wood, any questions or comments?
No, I just want to echo what you said about how instructive it was to have the Ramsey case in there as kind of a counterpoint. So I really appreciate the staff's work and writing up this step. Thank you.
All right. Is there any public comment on item 5? Hearing and seeing none, do we have a motion on item 5?
I'll move
I-
to approve.
And I'll second. Sorry.
Ms. Linkert?
Commissioner Baker,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Manage.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right. Thank you. Next, proceed to item 6 in the matter of Dirk Starbuck, FPPC number 18297. Commissioner Baker, you also asked for this one to be pulled.
And I'm not sure it was necessary to pull it to find this out, but it is helpful to understand, in contrast with 1090, which is should have, and I believe does have an almost automatic legal effect on the agreement that is reached. In this instance, is there any effect that a violation and a stipulation has on the underlying decisions that were made by that council? I believe it was a council. Yeah, the city. It's not. Am I correct that it's not voided automatically?
That's a great question.
Unlike 1090, I mean, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Unlike 1090, where we do have the ability to sort of claw back the contract. Here, we do not have any similar type of authority to impact a local ordinance. In this scenario, the only jurisdiction we have under the Act is to charge administrative fines for the conflict of interest violations.
Got it. My only other point, when this was also for feedback purposes, is I thought it was very appropriate that the second count was the maximum fine. I realize it's $5,000, but I believe that's the count that pertained to the city attorney actually saying you shouldn't participate in this, and the respondent did it anyway. So I wanted to take a moment to provide feedback. Again, I thought the fine structure where the first count, which was based on attorney information, was less than the maximum, and the second one was the maximum that we are allowed to charge or provide, because it did, it's not a great result when a city council member, despite advice of counsel from the city, continues to pursue something in which they may have an interest. So I thank the team for that structure and want to provide that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments for Mr. Burden on this item? Actually, Commissioner Baker's question prompted a question in my mind, so let me ask you this. As to count 2, the item that the councilperson voted on where they had been advised that they had a conflict, I was looking back through the summary of facts, and it appears that the council actually discussed that ordinance several times. For purposes of the PRA conflict rules, is it only a conflict for purposes at the meeting where the council member voted? or could we have charged additional violations for each meeting he participated in?
That's a good question. I do think arguably we could have charged for each discrete decision that was made throughout the process. In this case, we decided, in the interest of settlement, to charge essentially the culmination of each series of events. And so that's why here we chose to charge for the final vote on the matter and not necessarily the underlying discussions that led up to that. But yes, I do think we could charge for the individual decisions under the act.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Any other commissioner questions for Mr. Burton?
This is more of a question that I know that has been answered before at prior commission meetings, but for the benefit of all of us and the public, in terms of the proposed penalty of $8,000, is that paid out of Mr. Starbuck's personal funds, or can he pay that out of campaign account?
I don't know as to this particular case how the fine would have been paid. I think generally we don't have any restrictions on the payor of the actual fine. I'm not educated enough to speak to the requirements of, or I'm sorry, the ability to pay out of a committee campaign account. I do believe it happens on occasion, but in this case, I'm not sure who actually paid the fine.
We can go into more detail of that at another point, but just wanted to raise that question for discussion. So thank you.
I appreciate the question.
All right. No further questions for Mr. Burton. Do we have any public comment on item 6? Hearing and seeing none, I will move approval of item 6. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Match.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
thank you, Assistant Chief Burke. All right, let's move to item 11. This is the regulation projects and schedule for 2023. Mr. Bainbridge thought that we were going to get through this by putting on consent. Commissioner Wood, fire away.
Oh man, you threw him under the bus. So I can't see General Counsel Bainbridge yet, but hello. Oh, there you are. Hi. It's great to see you, and thank you for giving us this kind of project summary is what I'm looking at. And one thing that caught my eye is that, you know, the expected stuff we'll be doing emanates from legislation. Of course, the chair has a couple of ideas. But then there are a couple of things from staff that I thought it would, I mean, we're going to need education on it down the line anyway. So I thought it would be really helpful just to get a really brief overview of what collection of enforcement penalties and contributions to a candidate not appearing in a general election, what those are about and kind of how they came about, if you don't mind.
Sure. Good morning, Dave Bainbridge, General Counsel. The first one that you mentioned, the collection of enforcement penalties project, was identified by our executive staff as a way to deal with collection penalties that have come about as the result of enforcement cases, but no payment has been received. So typically these will result from a default where we have been unable to collect any money. Or it could be a judgment after a hearing. So the commission in these cases have issued an order imposing a monetary fine, and we then make efforts to collect on those. A lot of times those efforts don't produce much in terms of money to pay off the penalty, and a few of them will just sit on the books for years and years and years. And we make collection efforts. We spend a lot of resources trying to collect sometimes what are small amounts of money that are unlikely to be collected. So what we'd like to provide is some authority to reduce or waive penalties in certain circumstances. Essentially those circumstances where it's a bad debt, you know, good money, spending good money after bad. Because it's an order of the commission, we currently don't have any authority to reduce those on our own volition. So what we're looking to do is put some regulations in place that create the criteria of when one of the staff members, it could be the chair, it could be the executive director, or the chief of admin, whoever, has some authority to reduce or eliminate a old debt that's owed as the result of an enforcement penalty.
That's really interesting. And I mean, I can imagine that we are spending good money after bad, but I also wonder what kind of incentives that's going to create. And so I look forward to discussing it down the line. And then how about contributions to a candidate not appearing in a general election? It was kind of amazing to me to think that we might not have much on the books already about how to handle this. So I'm curious to hear what this is really about.
Yeah, well, there's lots on the books. We just found a couple little areas, little cracks that we thought needed to be filled in through regulation. The first issue we've identified is one of sort of dueling advice letters over the years, which is what to do with contributions that are raised for a general election when the candidate withdraws prior to the primary election. So there are rules in place for what happens if you lose in the primary and what you can do with money you've raised already for the general election. But there aren't any specific regulations as to what happens if a candidate withdraws prior to the primary. So what we're going to propose is that we make the rule the same if you withdraw from the primary as if you lost. So that's one of the issues. And then the other one is if a candidate wins the primary such that there's no general election. So some elections you can win outright in the primary. And so this would be to clarify that the events that would result after an election, when that's the case, they don't have to wait until the general election is over with. It's after the primary if there is no general election. The primary date is then the date of the determinative election, which has some effect on some campaign reporting things.
I gotcha. Thank you very much. Those specifically were kind of cracks that it does seem like you guys identified that I never would have thought of. So I really appreciate it.
Sure. All right. Thanks, Commissioner Wood. Any other questions for Mr. Bainbridge on item 11? All right. The one aspect of item 11 that I will just take the opportunity to highlight is under the administrative subpoenas, the source is listed as the chair, and I think that's not totally inclusive of the sources. That actually was a recommendation from folks in the enforcement division who identified some of the voluntary compliance processes that we're currently using as a roadblock to the more efficient resolution of enforcement matters. And so that is why we're going to be taking up that part of the regulation and trying to tighten the time frame for voluntary production of documents, et cetera. So just wanted to make that point. Anything further on item 11 from the commissioners? All right. Any public comment on item 11? Hearing and seeing none, I will move that we adopt the regulation projects and schedules for 2023, item 11. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Manich.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Excellent. All right. Now proceed to item 12, the first of our general items. That's our legislative development. And with us will be Senior FPPC, the Legislative Counsel, Ms. Nakano.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Nice to see you all. The legislative development memo attached to today's agenda includes upcoming legislative deadlines and the membership of relevant legislative committees. You'll note that the membership of the assembly committees had not been fully set at the time that the legislative update was finalized, but if you click through the links in the memo, you'll be able to see those assignments if you wish. The elections committee chairs remain the same as last year, though many of the other members are new this year. On to new bills. 4 commission-related bills have been introduced so far. I'll start with SB 29 by Senator Glazer. This bill relates to the Commission's Political Reform Education Program and is a reintroduction from last year. The bill does 3 main things. It codifies the program in statute. It authorizes the commission to charge a fee to participants, and it requires filing officers to waive the $10 per day late filing fee for a person who completes the program in connection with that late filing. For this last change, this ensures that if a person chooses to participate in PrEP and successfully completes the program, there will be no punitive fines. Next is AB 37 by Assemblymember Bonta, relating to the use of campaign funds for security expenses. Candidates and elected officers are currently allowed to use campaign funds for home or office electronic security systems, but only if certain conditions are met. The candidate or officer must have received threats to their physical safety. The threats must have arisen from their status as a candidate or elected officer, and the threats must have been reported to a law enforcement agency. Existing law also requires expenditures for these purposes to be reported to the commission and requires the candidate or officer to reimburse the committee if they sell the property that the security system is located on. AB 37 repeals those conditions and requirements and instead would enact a broader standard that would allow campaign funds to be used for security expenses to protect a candidate, elected officer, or the immediate family or staff of the candidate or elected officer. And the standard is the security expenses must be reasonably related to the candidate or elected officer's status as a candidate or elected officer. Also, in addition to home or office electronic security systems, the bill would allow campaign funds to be used for personal security. The next bill is AB 83 by Assemblymember Lee. This is also a reintroduction from last year. The bill prohibits foreign-influenced business entities from making contributions, expenditures, and independent expenditures, thereby expanding the existing prohibition on foreign contributions. The term foreign-influenced business entity is defined in the bill and is also included in the memo. The bill would require any business entity that makes a contribution or expenditure to file a statement with the filing officer and candidate or committee, avowing that the business is not foreign influenced. It would also prohibit a person from using a contribution or expenditure from a business entity unless the person has received that statement. There is a fourth bill that was introduced after the agenda was posted. That bill is AB 270, also by Assemblymember Lee. The bill is currently an intent bill, which is simply a placeholder bill that will be amended later with substantive language. Currently, the bill states that it will relate to public financing of campaigns, and I will keep the commission updated on any future amendments. Last, I'll note that we are making good progress in securing authors for the commission's legislative priorities this year. I'm happy to report that we have very good prospects for several of those ideas, including a reintroduction of the Data Act. I anticipate that I will be able to report next month on those bills in print. That's all for my update today. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Nakano. Any questions or comments for Ms. Nakano? Commissioner Baker?
Thank you, Ms. Nakano, for the great report. Minor question has to do with the notation of minor changes and cleanup bill. Is that something that would become a committee bill, or would we be the sponsors? Can you say a little bit about how the cleanup bill generally will be handled? And is this something that we do with any regularity?
To my recollection, my knowledge, I don't think we've done a larger cleanup bill like this ourselves. Frequently, the Assembly Elections Committee will have a cleanup bill. Mostly things are comprised almost entirely of things that are non-controversial. It has to be supported by the entire committee. So for this one, I think there may be some items that are appropriate for a committee bill. That'll be up to the committee. We don't have word yet on which of those might be included. But we anticipate that some of them may be included in a committee bill. Others that aren't appropriate for that, we'll try to get into another vehicle.
Okay. And what's our process for determining what would be a good candidate for proposing be a cleanup? Do we solicit information from our team internally? How does something become a candidate for being in a cleanup bill?
It comes from various places. A lot of it comes from staff, things that they have noticed that need to be cleaned up. Sometimes it comes from outside parties who have pointed it out to us, but by and large, it's from staff.
Okay. I guess that would be my external message is for all who monitor what we do and the regulated community and otherwise, if they think there's some good candidates for a cleanup, I think I think we would love to hear it. If we're going to undertake an opportunity for a cleanup bill, because they don't happen that, at least on our initiation, that frequently. And we're always looking to do better where there could be areas of improvement. So for all you who are listening, if you've got a cleanup bill idea, I hope we'll hear those ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments for Ms. Nakano? All right. Thank you, Ms. Nakano.
Thank
See
you.
you next month. Is there any public comment on item 12? Hearing and seeing none. Thanks, Mr. Nakano. All right, we'll move to item 13. This is our fiscal year 2023-24 budget. And with us is our Chief of Administration, Ms. Hahn. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioner. I'm here to present 2023 and 2024 Governor's Budget. I would like to submit the report as is, but I would like to point out that based on this year's budget, we were allocated 13 new positions from the 6 BCP budget change proposal, sorry for my acronym, that we have submitted. So I'm here to answer any question that you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hahn. Any questions from commissioners for Ms. Hahn? Commissioner Wilson?
Well, yeah, just general question for those who haven't read the reports and prior budgets in detail. How does this budget compare to prior year's budget in terms of growth and staff numbers?
So this budget report compared to last year, I just want to go over like 1 year back, and it has an increase of approximately $2.1 million. And position-wise, we were allocated 13 new positions. So historically, this is the highest the commission have ever had that exceeded 100 positions, over 100 positions.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to put a little gloss on that, I know we'll talk about this more in a later item, but 7 of those 13 positions actually are going to enforcement, which is a significant increase to the enforcement division staff that we haven't seen for quite some time.
Correct.
Commissioner Baker, did you have any questions for Ms. Hahn?
Thank you. You answered the one, self-answered that one. Thank you about how those might be allocated. And my question is, in the past, you've been able to provide updates to us, and perhaps we can have one in the future, on the status of the compliance with the disability access on the website. It's been some time since we've had an update. My question isn't what is the update, although I would like that on a future meeting. It is the cost to that compliance. Can you share where that is built into this budget, if it is? Because as I recall from prior updates, it's a costly process, and curious how that is reflected in the budget.
So any expenses from rolling out the ADA compliance would come out from our OE&E, which is the money that's allocated under the 13%, $2.3 million for operating expenses and equipment that we have to absorb within that allocations.
So this budget does reflect, presumably that 2.3 builds those costs for the coming year into that number. It's reflected in there.
Yes.
So the costs you're anticipating in the coming year are in there.
We would have to absorb it within the $2.3 million we were allocated for the purpose of operating expenses. So yes, anything that we spend on to comply with that particular section of the law, yes, we would have to comply within that allocations.
But just to put a little gloss on it, though, what I think you're saying is we have to absorb the costs of doing that based on our existing prior budget. We didn't receive additional money from the legislature to support the significant costs of implementing this.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
This is more of a process question as a follow-up to Commissioner Baker's question. When it comes to ADA compliance, I think we all agree that it's extremely important. To what extent and this might be an IT question that could be answered at a later time. Does our IT department, under your direction, communicate with other commissions, other agencies to perhaps save resources as these ADA compliances are implemented? Because this wouldn't apply here, of course, but I know historically, in terms of information technology, you often have like silos within various departments and agencies, and then you have cost overruns. So I think it would be helpful at some point to know how we can utilize our resources by working with other state governmental entities.
Okay, I will provide that on my next update that's related to this topic. So then we could do a more in-depth dive of what was the workload and what was the cost, and that's affiliated with ADA compliance.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Hahn on the 2023-24 budget? All right. Thank you, Ms. Hahn.
Thank you.
Any public comment on item 13? Hearing and seeing none. All right, we'll proceed next. This is our Enforcement Division update. And we will receive a presentation from Assistant Chief Burton, recapping some information from 2022 and other aspects of the Enforcement Division.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. If you could just give me 1 second to pull up. We have a PowerPoint presentation. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Again, I'm Christopher Burden. I'm the Assistant Chief of Enforcement, and I'm happy to be here today to present to you our Enforcement Division update. So today I'm going to be touching on several different topics. First, our 2022 pre-election efforts, including the proactive pre-election outreach program that we do each election, as well as AdWatch. Next, we'll discuss some information regarding statute of limitations and how it impacts our cases. Then a brief update on our Streamline program, and then finally our 2022 workload recap. So 2022 was, of course, an election year for us. Typically, enforcement sees an elevated workload during election years, due in large part to a higher number of complaints and referrals received, as well as the division's participation in the proactive pre-election outreach program and AdWatch. In 2022, we saw more than 3,000 complaints and referrals that were submitted to enforcement. As you can see on the slide, 619 of these came prior to the June primary, and almost 1,300 came prior to the November general election. Prior to both elections in 2022, we also participated in our proactive pre-election outreach program. As a refresher, this program sees local filing officers refer to us candidates and committees that have not filed their pre-election campaign statements. We then make extensive efforts to bring those non-filers into compliance as soon as possible, with the goal of getting all campaign statements filed prior to the election. In 2022, in particular, we received 67 referrals through this program in conjunction with the primary election, and then we got 318 before the general election, which was an increase since the 2020 elections. Of those referrals, all but 2 of the candidates or committees ended up filing their statements prior to election day. Further, during the final 2 months of 2022, so working after the November general, enforcement issued 144 warning letters and 2 no action closure letters stemming from the proactive referrals. Finally, although AdWatch always remains live, we of course see a large increase in submissions prior to each election. And this year we saw 47 submissions submitted before the primary election and almost 200 before the general, which was a significant increase from prior years. Of those submissions, the most common varieties of ads that we saw in 2022 included mailers, banner signs, text messages, and campaign websites. On that note, I would like to thank our hardworking enforcement staff for their outstanding work in 2022. Our support staff, investigators, intake staff, and attorneys all played an integral role in our pre-election efforts with the ultimate goal of ensuring we get as much public disclosure as possible prior to the elections. I'm happy to pause here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I had a couple questions. The AdWatch submissions, there were 261 of those. How many of those resulted in a case being opened?
I don't have a specific figure for that, but many of them do result in cases being opened and taken to a full investigation. The first step with any of those is to try and gain compliance before the election. So we make immediate efforts to contact the committees and give them the information that they need to make changes to their ads to the extent possible. I don't have a specific figure for how many cases we've opened, but I can get that for you.
Okay, can you make a note of that? That I would like us to have a specific granular number on that. And specifically, so I'm clear, you have here the total number we received in 261. I'd like to know what the resolution was for those. And you can group them in categories, open, close, what have you, that's fine, but I'd like to know what the disposition was on those. With respect to proactive pre-election outreach, what's the average lifespan of one of those?
Well, at least in 2022, we did try to move quickly to resolve those cases as soon as possible. I cited that number where we issued 144 warning letters, and we do typically issue warning letters if the committee or candidate files before the election. So because those are cases that we can usually pretty quickly dispose of, we do try to get those out as soon as possible. We of course, it doesn't happen for every case, but we do try to prioritize getting those out as soon as we can.
Okay. So if I'm remembering correctly, I think one of the prior reports to the commission was that like 90, higher than that, probably 95%, if I'm remembering correctly, resulted in compliance. So it was successful in that sense. Yes. What I'm trying to do for the commission's benefit is get an understanding of how long we have to work in order to gain that compliance. If people are being responsive after one or two phone calls, or if this is something where we're spending weeks and weeks and weeks harping on people.
That's a good question. It really depends. Some of the committees, and I'm saying committees to also include candidates. By the time we've contacted them, they have already filed. So maybe they already did it on their own initiative. Some of them file as soon as possible after that first contact. But some of them don't. Some of them we do have to seek legal action, and we have two mechanisms we can use to do that. We will personally serve a probable cause report on them, initiating an administrative case, and we also have authority to file for a civil injunction. We normally don't get to that point, but we did come close this election, and we have done it in the past. So. In terms of the responses to our compliance efforts, I think it is a pretty broad range, but and some of them are filing the day before the election in response to a probable cause report, or we're going to file this civil complaint the next day. So I think it's kind of a pretty broad scope.
Okay. Again, I think the commission could benefit from more granular information on that. Another question I had about those pre-election outreach efforts. So when we're looking at the numbers and trying to match this all up to understand things, when we have a proactive pre-election outreach that successfully results in a filing being made before the election, and we issue a warning letter, is that reported in the complaints received and cases closed numbers. I'm looking at the executive staff report
Right.
we get every month that shows the breakdown of cases open,
Right.
cases closed, etc.
Yes, it would. Each proactive referral is entered as a complaint into our complaint in case database. And then ultimately, in order to resolve the case through a warning letter, it does become a case as well. And so yes, it should be included in those numbers.
Okay, so 380, because that's the number here, total 385 of the complaints received in 2022 are attributable to proactive pre-election outreach. Is that a correct way of
I
reading it?
believe they're logged as referrals, but yes.
Okay, referrals received. In that 3,103,
Yes.
385 of those are through this.
Yes.
Okay. Is AdWatch treated the same? So that's included in that number as well? The 3,000.
I'm not sure if we categorize AdWatch as a complaint or a referral, but
it's included.
But yes,
with
it is included.
3103.
Yes,
Right?
it is.
Okay. Those are my questions on that portion of the presentation. Do other commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Wood?
So I also will appreciate more granularity, which probably wouldn't surprise anybody. But on AdWatch in particular, Chair Maddich was talking about putting giving us two buckets for open and closed. But you had mentioned trying to gain pre-election compliance. And so I assume that counts as an opened case, but I would like to know basically the success rate in getting pre-election compliance from AdWatch, because in all the stuff I've read from the next agenda item, it seems like the AdWatch has brought in a bunch of work for the enforcement division. And so I want to know kind of what the quality of the the submissions we're receiving are, and how quick they are to be dismissed or to be, to gain compliance. And so that's kind of my goal in wanting that more granular information aside from just open and close.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. We certainly do get plenty of AdWatch submissions that do not have merit, which can be quickly disposed of. We get a lot of duplicates as well, but I'd be happy to gather the information for you, the more detailed information.
I mean, honestly, I have a bunch of seminar students who might be willing to work on this too. So we should talk offline about this, because I may be able to get you some help on this in a way that they would be learning pretty important stuff too. And so we may be able to not put a bunch of work on you and get some help here. So maybe let's talk later, okay?
Okay, that sounds good.
If you want help, I don't know.
I don't believe we have our own interns this spring, so perhaps we could lean on you. Thank you.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Thanks, Commissioner Wood. Any other questions for Mr. Burton on this portion of the presentation? All right, please continue.
So this next slide presents some information to you regarding the impact that the applicable statute of limitations has on our cases. Although the majority of our cases are resolved before the statute of limitations expires, the life of some cases extends up to that point in time. For this reason, for certain cases, it becomes necessary for us to toll the statute of limitations, and we can do that either by initiating the administrative prosecution with a probable cause report, or we can enter into a tolling agreement with it, which is executed with the respondents. The statute of limitations expiration date for each case is tracked in our case database system. The case attorneys are required to add this date, or at least their best estimate, at the outset of the case, and then update it if necessary throughout the pendency of the case. Sometimes the violations will change over the course of the investigation, and so we believe it's important to track on that throughout a case. Despite our efforts, occasionally the statute does expire on our cases. You can see the number on the screen there. Over the course of the last 4 calendar years, there were 27 cases where that occurred. And that number represents approximately 0.5% of all of our cases over that same time period. Also, of those 27 cases, more than half of those were the result of bad filing officer referrals related to SEI late filers. And then finally on that slide, you'll also see on the right some estimated figures for the number of pending cases that will be approaching the statute of limitations in the coming years. And with that, I'd be happy to pause for questions on this section.
Any questions for Mr. Burton on this portion of his presentation? Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. And thank you very much for providing this information. Can you say a little bit more about when you say half of these 27 cases were from bad filing officer referrals on SEI? Just a little bit better understanding. As I recall from some of the prior meetings we've had, how we're wanting to get more information from filing officers so we could track people down and so on. Can you provide more information on that, please?
Sure. So we did look at some of these, and I think what occurred in a lot of those bad referrals is that we received an SEI referral for a recent year, however, where the statute had not expired. But then once we looked at it, we determined that the official had actually left office 3 years earlier, 5 years earlier, and so their obligation to file SEIs had ended beyond the statute, and so at that point there were no violations within the 5-year window to prosecute, and then we closed the case.
Okay, and about half of the cases, you're not saying half of the cases were that scenario. That's just one of the scenarios?
I'm not sure what percentage of the half that scenario applies to, but that did occur in some of them. But basically, when we get a bad referral, it just means that after we've looked into it, essentially the underlying impetus for that referral we found to be lacking merit, and so then we have no choice but to close it.
Okay, that sounds different than a statute of limitations determination. That sounds like an intake question. Am I right?
Right. So with the bad referrals, these examples, what occurred is we received an SEI referral for, let's say we received it in 2019, and then they were being referred for failing to file their 2018 annual SEI. And this is coming from their filing officer. Once we looked into it, we determined that, and perhaps due to outreach attempts from enforcement, we determined that public official actually left office in 2014. And so at that point, we are beyond the statute of limitations for charging any SEI count. And so we then have to close it out.
Okay. Helpful to have that dates. That's what you mean by there, as opposed to there's no merit. It's that it happened earlier. I thought you mentioned, I was interpreting there's no merit as an intake question where there's
Sure,
no merit, so you don't need to open an investigation. Yeah.
I guess I'll clarify no merit as to the 2018 SEI that it was referred to us for.
Understood. Okay. I appreciate that. The other half, when I see statute of limitations and I saw 27, I was like, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of potential cases that maybe had something appropriate them. Has someone gone through the other ones to see either why that other half, why they might have expired, and if there were some in there that were maybe not streamlined candidates or prep candidates, could have been more serious? Has there been any kind of analysis of that other half and the scope of what may have happened? I'm wondering, going forward, as we hope that this statute of limitations, as much as possible, won't expire, is there a chance we've missed something big, and has an analysis been done of that other half that weren't bad filing SEIs?
Right. I don't have a specific breakdown of the 27 beyond the information about the bad filing officer referrals. I believe at least one of those involved an FTB audit, because the FTB audit cases we get pretty late in the process, and usually we have to move pretty quickly. I do know at least one of those was an FTB audit where we received the audit report and all the violations were already outside of the statute of limitations. And we do, as a matter of process, open a case for those, and then so that one would have been automatically closed out. But despite the fact that this is a very low percentage of our cases, we certainly recognize that we can improve this. And I think later on with the other agenda item, I think those sort of changes are going to be beneficial, as well as the restructuring of enforcement, which we're going to talk about at the end of this presentation. So yes, it's not 100% of our cases that we resolve before the statute, but we want to get to that 100% for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate getting to see these numbers and including for 23 and 24. And I'll withhold anything else related to statute of limitations for our subsequent discussion. But I appreciate having the numbers available to us. I feel like it's the first time we have in the enforcement update. And it's important to be able to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wilson?
Yeah, Assistant Chief Burton, I kind of have a follow-up question kind of relating to statute of limitations. If you have a filing officer, they file a complaint, do you look to, well, you obviously look to see if the statute of limitations is run already. If you see that the statute of limitations will run in the next month, 2 months, does that case automatically get priority, given all the, given the heavy workload that you have? I mean, how does it work if you realize, okay, we're up on the statute of limitations, it's about to run out, let's make this a priority because of, the actual deadline is coming up. Is that part of the process?
Yes, it is. Those cases are almost always going to be prioritized so that we can, at the very least, do something to toll the statute of limitations so we can continue to review and investigate and try to resolve the case to conclusion. So yes, we almost always prioritize those cases.
And I'm not making any assumptions with this question, but have you seen any pattern with particular governmental entities in terms of their filing officers sending you cases that are on the verge of the statute of limitations running out?
I don't have any specific figures on that. I think we've discussed that in a recent meeting. I'd be happy to look into that for you, though.
Yeah, just kind of a general question. I mean, if there's a pattern, there is a pattern. But if there's not a pattern with particular local governmental entities, then it wouldn't matter. So thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Hello, Galena West, Executive Director. I'll just chime in on that. We did have a discussion about that, and enforcement had identified patterns of filing officers who were not giving good referrals. And we actually worked with the legal division last year to get a regulation change. So we're hoping that this year and forward, these bad referrals will be less and less.
And if a regulatory change achieves the goal that you seek to achieve, that makes sense. I would think that it seems pretty non-controversial. And if at some point, I'm not sure it could be the cleanup legislation that Ms. Nakano referenced earlier, but I think a filing officer would be more inclined to take a law or statute in place more seriously than they would one of our regulations. They should take our regulations.
Don't tell the
seriously.
legal division that.
No, they should take regulations as having the same effect of legislation signed by the governor, but just in case.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Wilson. Thanks, Mr. Burton. I just want to point out for the commission's benefits, we're talking about statutes and limitations, to give a couple sort of real life, if you will, examples of how it comes up sometimes. If you look, we didn't pull these items, so we didn't talk about them earlier, but items 8 and 9 on our enforcement consent calendar, I think are illustrative. The number 8, this is the John Cox matter. The activity took place in 2018 and prior, but we did not receive the results from FTB of the audit that uncovered these violations until late in 2021. And so you'll note there is a reference to having the statute of limitations told by agreement. So that's a situation in which we received from FTB late information that required us to obtain that type of an agreement from respondents. And would also just note that enforcement investigated, prosecuted, and came to us with a resolution of that case within a year and a half. And so I think that's an example of a success story, even up against a statute of limitations. And I would just point out for the commission's benefit, item 9, to my mind, is another example of this. Sworn complaint was not filed with us until August of 2021, about a year and a half ago. And yet some of these violations went back to 2016, once again necessitating tolling the statute, not because of anything we did, but because we received the complaint late. And again, within a year and a half, we have a resolution before us. So I want to highlight, even in difficult circumstances with statutes, some of the success that our staff has had, as evidenced by those 2 stipulations today. So, having said that, any other questions or comments on statutes of limitations before we proceed? All right, Mr. Burton, carry on.
So this next slide just gives you a brief update on the streamlined settlement program. In 2022, we resolved 142 cases with a streamlined penalty. As you can see, more than half of these cases involved campaign filer or reporter violations. I think that's pretty consistent with what we've seen. And the chart gives you kind of a sense of the other types of violations that we are resolving through the streamlined settlement program, either through a penalty or, of course, a warning letter. A case can qualify for a warning letter through streamline as well. But that's what I have on streamline. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on streamline.
Questions for Mr. Burton on the streamline program? I have one question. Do you share these statistics with the staff in the prep who staff our prep program? Because it does strike me. I mean, we've talked about this internally, but using this type of data, which could evidence a need for additional training for folks in certain areas, and it just strikes me, 55%, not actually that surprising, I suppose, but campaign late filer, late reporter. So having that be one source that folks in prep can look to when prioritizing what programs they develop in sequence to roll out. I just commend that as a suggestion.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if we've shared this type of data with them in the past, but I can definitely see the benefit in that. So thank you.
I'm happy to chime in for that. Galena West again. Yes, we do have all of this information. And in fact, we've had prep meetings in the last couple of months to prioritize which programs should be next in order to not only address a lot of this workload, but also in the item coming up, the suggestion that take on more of a advertisement and campaign type inquiries. So yes, that all this information they've been using to try to assess how to move forward to be the most effective.
Very good. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Wood.
Thanks, Chair Matich. I know that we have seen this number before, but can you just remind me, we're just seeing percentages here of a pie, but how big is the pie? How many cases were handled by Streamline in 2022?
It was 142 total.
Okay. And what is your impression about the capacity to, for example, double that number if we do start diverting a bunch of AdWatch type complaints to Streamline?
Well, we always welcome the ability to resolve cases through Streamline because it's by design. It's what it's meant to make things more efficient for us. I mean, I will say a lot of the AdWatch type cases that we get do qualify through the advertising Streamline in particular. Especially with the revision a couple of years ago, we are able to resolve a lot more advertising cases through Streamline. So yes, that'd be great to see that number tick up in coming years.
Okay. The reason I asked is that Chair Matich talked about the folks over at PrEP, which is the Streamline program, right? And so it sounded like it was 2 different groups of people. So I wanted to make sure.
They are 2 different
help me.
sets of folks. So Streamline is a part of our enforcement division. And Mr. Burton, sorry, I just jumped right in. Correct anything I say incorrect. Streamline is part of the enforcement program. PrEP is outside of enforcement. It is part of the legal division. And its intention is to take those cases which don't really warrant the use of enforcement resources and instead drive people towards compliance. So they're staffed by, PrEP is staffed by folks from the legal division. Streamline is part of the enforcement division, if that makes sense.
I gotcha. Okay. So if you're an enforcement division attorney, you might have 60 cases and some percent of them might be streamlined. But of course, it makes your life easier if a larger percent of them become streamlined. That's basically how it works, right?
Yes, I would say that's correct.
Okay. Now I understand your answer. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. I actually had a question for you. When I was looking at the pie chart, streamlined cases by violation type, where are behested payments? I know we had some in streamlined.
Behested payments is not a large part of the pie yet because we just added that at the beginning of 2021. So I don't have I can get a specific number for you. I don't have that right here, but I imagine that's going to grow over time once we get more used to resolving those cases through streamline.
Okay. All right. That answers my question. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Burton? All right. Please continue.
These next few slides might look familiar to you. We've provided them before. And then essentially they serve to update you on what we saw in 2022. Here in particular, in terms of the number of complaints and referrals that we saw, we did see a significant increase in 2022. Again, we got a lot of proactive referrals and AdWatch as well. And over time, we've typically seen more referrals come through in the off-election years, but that trend seems to be changing a bit, and now we're receiving, I think, a similar amount of referrals every year, and so that's a trend that we're starting to note. We're generally just getting more referrals, but that would be the update for 2022. And the next slide just shows of the complaints that we received, the timeframes within which they were resolved. 14% in particular, 14% were resolved on either the day of receipt or within a day. 16% between 2 and 7 days, and 45% between 8 and 30 days. And the average number of days in 2022 that a complaint was open was approximately 26 days. And then finally, another slide that we've shared with you before. This graph breaks down the average pendency of a case based on violation type. As you can see, there's certain types of cases that take longer than others, due in part to the nature of the investigation. And certain violation types don't qualify for streamline. But as you can see there, the numbers are pretty similar to what we've shared with you previously, but it is updated for 2022. So I'd be happy to answer questions on those last 3 slides.
Do the referrals received include referrals that we have made to ourselves?
Yes, they do.
For SEIs, because I think I remember that SEIs are a big source of referrals to us. And mindful of the fact that I believe we have the SEI program running in prep. When we receive SEI referrals, what's the process for routing those to prep? And if they're routed to prep, are they included in these referral numbers that you have here?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with particulars in terms of prep, in terms of how we refer to them and whether or not those are included in those numbers.
That's fine. I just thought of it, and so maybe Mr. Bainbridge can help us out.
Yeah, Dave Bainbridge, General Counsel. The referrals from SEI come from the administrative division. There's an SEI group within the admin division. So they refer those to enforcement. They don't go through prep, which is in the legal division.
Okay, so, but they go from admin to enforcement, and then enforcement sends them to prep if they're appropriate. Is that right?
Right. If they qualify for the prep program based on the criteria we have, enforcement would then refer them to the prep program.
Okay.
If the filer is interested in participating.
Right. Assuming all the ifs. Is that referral still included in these enforcement numbers, even though it's being resolved through prep?
Yes, it would be. It would be. It would be closed through the prep program. That would be the resolution. I I don't know the particulars of the procedure, but I believe it goes to prep and they complete the requirement and then it comes back to us after that.
To issue
To-
the no action letter, right? Okay, I just wanted to get a sense, because again, we're talking about workload, right? So understanding if something is being, it's true, it's being referred to enforcement on the front end, but if enforcement is then sending it to the legal division, who's then completing the matter, I think that's information the commission should understand.
It gives us another tool to resolve cases and streamline cases, but it's still included in the data that we're looking at.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that. Any other questions for Mr. Burton on the complaints and referrals received charts? All right, please continue, Mr. Burton.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I have this question down for at some point, and I think this might be the spot where it is. If not, move it to another point. There's that 14-day, after a complaint is filed, it's assigned, or I should say sworn complaint, if I recall, there's a 14-day time period. And are you able to address at this point how many cases that should be within the 14-day time period of either determining if you're going to open a case or if it's going to be closed? How many need to go beyond that 14-day? If like what the outlier numbers are for that? Is that something that is available to you?
That's a good question. I don't have those numbers at hand. I believe what you're referring to is with any sworn complaint, we have 14 days within which to resolve it. However, we do have the option to seek more, to get more time to respond to it. Of course, we do our best to respond in 14 days. So, but yeah, I'd be happy to get the data for you on, as you say, the outliers and present that to you at a later time.
Thank you. I mean, I think we've had some follow-up questions here that are going into more granular information. And so I'm assuming we're going to have another update. I would think if March is a reasonable time frame, that would be great. And if you could include it in that by March, that update to us, I would be grateful for it. That's one of the big outliers I'm kind of interested in. So I think that's my question for now. I'm ready to hear the rest.
Thank you. So this final slide, as I referenced earlier in the presentation, enforcement is looking to make certain improvements in structure. And so for this final slide, Executive Director West is going to be providing an update on the internal organization of the Enforcement Division going forward.
Hello, Galena West, Executive Director. So basically what this is showing you is addressing a lot of the issues that have come up as we have spoken. So a lot of the things that have been identified are, as you can see on the slide, can you go back to the slide about the number of complaints and referrals? Maybe not.
I can try.
Maybe it's gone forever now. So pretend on this black screen that there were, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, so as you can see, so prior to 2015, the amount of complaints and referrals was about 1,300, 1,200 at the most. And so before that, there was structures in place that could handle that kind of workload. But as the workload increased, then you can see election years, the complaints have been pretty consistently around 1,400. But the referrals have not remained consistent. So what used to be, you get a lot of referrals on non-election years, and then you get a limited amount of referrals on election years when people are busy with other things. That hasn't happened anymore. So as you can see, the amount of referrals has stayed steady every year, causing the number of complaints and referrals we received to be over 3,100 this year. That's a far cry from 1,200 and before from 2015, 2014. So the workload has increased. So what we want to do is change the structure to identify that workload and make it a more reasonable and efficient way to handle it. So if you go back to the org chart, what we're going to do is we're going to have 2 assistant chiefs in enforcement. And one is going to be over an attorney group that also has an AGPA that acts as a paralegal and helps write up probable cause reports and such. And then the other group is going to be the intake group. And the intake group for the first time is going to have attorneys in it. And how that is going to help is that right now, the intake group that has non-attorneys, they have all of the complaints and referrals, but they also have a caseload of cases they're supposed to still be able to get to, as well as going through this exponential increase in complaints and referrals. So it's not a manageable load right now for that group. So by adding attorneys, we're going to add support so that as the law gets more complicated, these complaints get more complicated. So issue spotting is more troublesome, and the research that goes into looking up things takes more time. So having attorneys that are dedicated to that can speed up that process and be a resource is going to help that process. And then also to have someone to take off the giant actual caseload that intake maintains right now. So by working together and having a dedicated team, I think it addresses how that workload has increased quite a bit over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So by making a structural change, we're hoping to cause these to not be such burnout positions. The thing about enforcement is that you always have more to do, right? Because there's always going to be more cases, more complaints. There's more referrals. There's always something to do. You're never going to be bored. You're never going to have a day where you go, gosh, I just don't have anything to do today. But it's also kind of a thankless job because the complainants are generally not happy with you. The respondents are generally not happy with you. And so having it to be a job that is supported, to have these individual units that can support each other and lean on each other, I think is one of the things that is going to help people be able to do their jobs and be happy doing their jobs, because most of the people that work at the FEBC, as you know, are here because they believe in the mission. So we want to give them the tools to be able to do their job and still go home at night and not have, some sort of stomach issues from being stressed out. So we want it to not be a burnout job. So we're thinking that this structure will help with a lot of the different organizational issues. And then as you can see, we've highlighted the boxes that will be the new positions to where we can have a thoughtful discussion about what those positions should do. How are they going to be the most useful is it more an administrative person that needs to be in to help do the day-to-day, spreadsheets for the investigators or whatever it is. So we need to have those discussions with each group to figure out how these new positions can best help instead of just throwing them in there. So that's the plan. So happy to answer any questions about it.
All right, thank you. Any commissioners have questions? Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Matich. Thank you, Executive Director Galena West. So we do appreciate your hard work. Thank you. You mentioned the spike in complaints over the last 5 to 7 years. Do we have any sense? I have my theories, but do you have any sense for why we've seen such an increase?
I think we definitely give a shout out to the education division, because I think the filing referrals is almost a direct result of them educating those filing officers, because a lot of people come in, take the job, and then say, oh my gosh, no one's made a referral for 10 years, which also causes them to give bad referrals because they're like, here's everything that I have. So hopefully with the new reg, they'll help out with that. But I think that's one component. I think just generally people are more involved in politics than ever before. And so it causes people to want to file complaints about their local goings-ons. And so, yeah, that's kind of my theory. I'd be interested to hear yours.
You're more, articulate in communicating those theories, but one theory, and it's on a small level, and I know Commissioner Baker may have looked at this as well, is that prior to the more recent term limits were passed by the voters in 2012, you'd see 3 or 4 state senators that previously never served in the legislature. They came from local government, or they ran for the Senate for the first time. Now you have and counting, over a third of the 40 members of the state Senate never served in the assembly. So in many cases, they're newly elected officials or definitely new officials at the state level. So that's my input on that point. Thanks.
That's interesting.
Other questions for Executive Director West? Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. Yes, I kind of piggybacking on Commissioner Wilson's point. I wondered, I was looking at what were some of the changes in the law that happened after 2015, and how I overlap that with the nature of the cases that we've seen. And I know the Disclose Act was passed, but I don't know that advertising. I have to go back and look at the pie chart and have it in front of us. How much of that is tied to say the Disclose Act or other major changes in that was on the advertising side. I don't know how much we can go back and look and see, try to trace where was there a change that resulted in an uptick in cases. We have the uptick in cases, and it's carrying over. One question I want to ask is, and this may be too early, maybe it's for when we talk about enforcement procedures, but I saw in some of the comments that we received from staff about the proposed changes, suggestions for, say, an auditor who just works on, who has an expertise in financial audits, and other input about the allocation of these new resources. Is that part of what you're taking into consideration here? And is what you're presenting to us still fluid and part of a conversation, or is this is what's going to happen going forward? And if so, can you respond to the suggestion in some of the public comment on a later agenda item that maybe an auditor would be very helpful to have, or people who are dedicated to a particular element of an investigation?
Thanks for asking that. Actually, I've met with a couple of the different groups, including the special investigators, because in their comments, I noticed some things that they could use some clarity on that maybe they hadn't received. So I think there was some confusion about when the auditors moved into their own division, that they were no longer a resource available. And so there is a procedure set up to where auditors can still be assigned to cases. It goes through Shraddha Shah, the chief of audits, and then she assigns workload. But the big difference is they don't have access to Salesforce anymore, and they're not part of enforcement, so that they're independent for their audits, but they can still have an enforcement caseload where they do specific things. So the investigators were very relieved after they heard that, and so they reminded me of their suggestion of can we have an auditor back? What we found in the past is having an auditor supervised by a non-auditor supervisor has caused us some issues in the past. So keeping the auditors in the audit division is the best managerial way that we have discovered. So we have had trial and error in that department. So we're going to make sure that that procedure is known to the staff so that they know that that option is available, and it's a resource. And I actually spoke with Shraddha yesterday, and she's all ready to go. So she's ready for the referrals. We already have a system. So yeah, so specifically answering your question, yes, those are the types of things that we're going to talk about. In fact, when I was speaking with the special investigators, a lot of them expressed a desire to have specialization. So some of them, like when we have a certified fraud investigator, and so she loves to do the campaign cases. And so conflicts of interest, maybe not her forte. So we're talking about this structure, but also looking into if we can have leads of different groups, and if we can have our groups working together more and expediting processes. So yeah, everything's on the table at this point, and it's just a beginning of a discussion.
Gotcha. And I know we'll have more of that maybe in the next agenda item, but thank you for that. Maybe this chart will become relevant in the next agenda item for some of those questions too. So keep it handy. Thank you.
Any other questions for Executive Director West on the Enforcement Division reorganization chart? Hearing and seeing none. Thank you, Executive Director West. Mr. Burton, do you have anything further you wish to add?
No, that concludes the Enforcement Division update. Thanks for your time.
All right. Any final questions for Mr. Burton before he leaves the table on the Enforcement Division update? Commissioner Baker.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. I was less direct about it, but I wonder if having the follow-up questions by March is a reasonable time frame. You know, there's a lot going on in enforcement right now, and I want to make sure it's I made that request. I like to hear the feedback if that's a reasonable time frame, and if when that more granular information on the questions we've asked. I know there's been a moment of transition here in enforcement. If we can make sure, you know, throughout the year, both the chair and I, I'm sure, as well as other commissioners in the past year, we've raised issues like, hey, can you bring this up during your annual report to us? And I just want to make sure those get captured in that March report. I'm not going to go through a whole checklist right now, but I know it would be valuable to hear from you by March if that's reasonable, and to be sure to include those items as well.
So, Commissioner Baker, two things. One, Executive Director West and I will get together and determine whether March is feasible or not. We had a preliminary discussion. I think that is, but you know, her and I can talk about that as I set the agenda for the next few meetings. Secondly, with respect to any ideas that you have about things you'd like to see in a presentation, if you can send those to Executive Director West as soon as possible, so that she has those, so that we can then plan and determine whether it's possible to be responsive to all of those things by March. That would be helpful. But we need to know that in order to know whether it's possible for March. So if you could send that, that'd be great.
Of course. I think I've primarily highlighted the ones, and then of course in the previous year, again, they've at our commission meetings, we may have identified a few others. So I appreciate that, and do defer to you and the team about what's the appropriate time to bring it up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bird.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll now proceed to item 15. We've been referencing them kind of obliquely throughout the meeting today. These are policy directives for the Enforcement Division that myself, the other commissioners, Executive Director West, and folks in enforcement have provided feedback on. And I would just say that it's set forth in the background. It's no secret that the Enforcement Division has had a number of challenges over the last several years. And as I wrote in the background, many of which are outside our control, but that we have to deal with as an agency. We just have to do it. And so this policy directive, broadly speaking, I think comprehensively addresses the three areas that we need to focus on in order to get back on track. And the first is getting the annual carryover of cases under control. And as Enforcement Division, both investigators and attorneys have suggested in their comments, we need to be able to get through that caseload and get it down to a manageable year-over-year amount before we can really get back on track and hit that 2-year proposed goal for most of our enforcement matters. So the first part of the proposal is precisely that. The Commission is directing the Enforcement Division, the Chief of Enforcement, in conjunction with the Executive Director, to utilize the discretionary mechanisms they have to get those numbers down by 75% over 2 years. And that every available information that I have from the Executive Director, from others, is an achievable goal with our existing processes. And so we need to make use of them and get those numbers down. The second portion has to do with timelines and procedures. And with respect to timelines, I think it's important that the Commission express in clear terms to the Enforcement Division an expectation that most cases should be resolved within 2 years. And we know that's possible. We see that even when confronted with statute of limitations problems, we're able to do it. It's a combination of other things are preventing us from doing that consistently. And so that should be our goal going forward once we have that carryover amount reduced. In addition to that, throughout conversations and anecdotally before the Commission, it's at least become clear to me and this Commissioner that we need some additional deadlines and we need to tighten up our procedures in enforcement. The commission is not setting blanket deadlines for every single case. We're not doing that where it's a one-size-fits-all approach. What we are doing is, in my mind, in my legal experience, the common sense thing of requiring that the enforcement chief communicate deadlines throughout the process appropriate to each individual case. And it is not clear to me that that's happening consistently for every case, and it should going forward. I think that's critically important. The other part of the procedures is the reporting and the communication to the commission of granular information so that we know, are we on track to meet these goals? What are some of the roadblocks that we continue to experience, et cetera, so the commission can respond when appropriate by regulation if we need to. If the commission needs to enact propose legislation, amendments to the act that make it easier for us to conduct our business and enforcement. If we need to do additional budget change proposals to continue adding to the staff as we did this year. That's the purpose of those reports. The commission needs that information to provide that support to the enforcement division. And finally, the third part of this policy directive really has to do with resources for enforcement. And again, we were successful in getting 7 new positions for enforcement starting this coming fiscal year. We're happy about that. But we don't know if that's enough. And so now we need to have periodic staffing reviews led by the executive director and the chief of enforcement to ensure we don't fall behind in staffing relative to our workload in enforcement. We need to have that, and that needs to be part of our regular practice. We need to make sure that the enforcement division also has the technological support it needs. A big part of keeping up with statute of limitations, keeping up with deadlines, being able to track things and have meaningful communication with staff is having the tools to do it. And it is no secret, I don't think, that we could use some improvement on the back end for staff's assistance in that. And so we are going to move forward with evaluating that and determining what we need going forward. So it's easier for managers in particular to track things and give timely feedback to staff. And then the final part of the resources, and we've alluded to this earlier, and I will credit Executive Director West. I think she led this idea, but looking at the AdWatch numbers and looking at the pre-election outreach numbers, it's pretty clear that that's 700 complaints or referrals, depending on where we categorize them, that are coming into enforcement that most likely could be handled by staff in another division. So that, when you look at that, you're taking a load of 3,100 and you're reducing it by 700 on the front end by making that structural change alone. And that's before we account with the additional staff and the other changes that we're going to make in enforcement. And so in my mind, my hope is that those 3 things, we put all of that together, that this comprehensive plan will assist enforcement in having, as I think Executive Director West so eloquently said, a more manageable experience in enforcement, so people don't get burned out and they don't always feel like they have their hair on fire. So that's the intention. That's the broad overview of the different aspects of this proposal, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues who have questions or comments. Commissioner Wilson.
Well, I have some suggestions to discuss, but I think it'd be more appropriate to maybe discuss those at some future date, Public Outreach and Technology Committee, because I don't want to get into a lot of detail here with recommendations that may or may not go anywhere.
Other commissioners want to discuss comments? Commissioner Wood.
It's so funny. I have the little profile picture, but I didn't know if you could see my hand. So I appreciate your work on this. I also really appreciate the public comment, or the public comments we received from staff, some of whom seem really overwhelmed and frustrated. And I'm hopeful that the additional staffing will be helpful in that regard. You mentioned not wanting to assign one-size-fits-all deadlines and things like that. I think that to the extent that we can have performance targets rather than kind of mucking around in enforcement procedures, I think that's going to be most helpful for them. In particular, I believe it was the enforcement division comment that came to us that talked about all the steps they have to go through when they need approval to offer basically a settlement. And it seems like some of that feels like red tape to them in ways that might not be that productive. So, I will speak only for myself, but I do think that it's important to, set performance targets without telling them what to do. And to the extent that they feel like some of this is red tape that isn't all that productive for the public, getting rid of some of that might be really helpful for them.
Thank you. Any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Baker?
Chair Manage?
Yes.
I don't think my hand was making it into the little box either. So I understand what Commissioner Wood is saying. I want to I second the point that Commissioner was making about the red tape and the many layers of review. And the extent that that's going to be looked at, I just strongly encourage it. I also am grateful for these reforms. They are complementary to the reforms that have been undergoing since, I think, one of my first meetings, if not my first meeting, in having the Streamline program and having the PrEP program and in promoting legislation that can remove roadblocks. So I appreciated, Chair Matich, that those are part of this and that they're complementary, and some of this is on us and future commissions to not go on autopilot, but really be asking the granular questions and advocating for the agency for changes that need to be made in legislation. Because, this is going to take time to implement. And we may all be off the commission by that point. And it's just a reminder to hopefully future commissioners to really take it seriously and do their part in advocating for whatever reforms need to be made. I do want to say this. I do think it is the intent, at least of this commissioner, I think all of us, that these will have teeth with these milestones and benchmarks will be meaningful and not overlooked or softened and really disregarded. Sometimes things can be put on a shelf. You got a reform package and they put on a shelf and you basically go back to what you're doing. And I want to encourage that. And the final point is that no case be compromised and not brought to a just resolution because there is a workload issue. I think that's something that both our hardworking team feel strongly about, as well as the commissioners, is that no case is going to basically that should be addressed, not be overlooked and corners cut. We're going to find a way to reach that balance. I do have one substantive point, and it's on the first page under Roman numeral 1A, where it's talking about how to get through that backlog and the case carryover cases. One of the questions I asked earlier today was, if there's a case that is the compliance that could have happened has happened, but then some years go on before there's resolution, is there any way to, we identify PrEP and Streamline and appropriate mechanisms for resolving that. Is there any way for our team to identify those cases for which, like perhaps in the Bill Dodd case, compliance happened, but we just haven't gotten to the settlement or resolution? I don't know if that's possible to do, if that just creates more work, but I would think those are also candidates for clearing some of the backlog. Is it administratively possible to identify those cases? I don't know.
Ms. West.
Galena West, I've already had some discussions with the assistant chiefs on how we are going to go about that. And now that we'll have 2 assistant chiefs, we'll be able to have more gatekeepers that will be able to analyze cases during the day and assign them out with specific direction. I would caution the commission one thing is that as we go through this caseload and we are looking for ways to resolve things, more discretion will need to be used to issue more warning letters, include things more in Streamline. So the not disregarded, no case be compromised, I completely understand that, but I think we also have to be realistic that if we're going to achieve this goal, that there are going to be a little bit of compromises made. That doesn't mean cases won't be resolved and they won't be looked at and they won't be given the diligence. What it means is the cases that have intent and lots of public harm and the things that we're concerned about will still be resolved the way we've been resolving. However, the other cases, we will have to expedite and have more discretion and handle them with a little more, say, amnesty involved. So I just want to bring that up in public, so it's been said in public as we move forward, and enforcement has the backing to resolve those cases.
Commissioner Baker?
Thank
do
you.
have anything further?
No, thank you.
All right. Ms. West, you said two things. I just want to put a kind of a point on it. You said we need to exercise our discretion more to get through the backlog, which is consistent with my understanding today of the regulations. But at the end, you said we're going to need more discretion. And so I'm not trying to play lawyerly word games. I sort of am. But it is to make the following point, which is if it is true that you have the discretion today to resolve the low public harm cases in an expeditious way to get the caseload down, for my part, that is what the commission is intending to communicate to you. If, in addition to that, if the enforcement staff and the enforcement division believes that there are areas in which they need additional discretion, then, at least for my part, I would like that to be communicated to the commission so that we know whether we need to go in and take a second look at whether it's the streamline regulations or some other type of a regulation where something that we have done is creating an obstacle to the efficient resolution of cases. But we need to hear that in order for us to do something about it. So then that's not an issue of the exercise of discretion. It is you need new discretion.
I completely agree. And I think as we apply this, we'll know more. And we'll see if the streamline regulation that provides the discretion to the enforcement chief needs to be amended. And also some of the criteria within streamline. I mean, we had a long discussion about behested payments today. So I think looking with fresh eyes, the streamline regulations were never intended to just be static. They were intended to be trial and error. So everything that we put into those and we're influenced by other people that aren't even here anymore. So it's always good to take a fresh look at it and see what's working, what's not working. The commission has gone more towards understanding that some behested payment reports will be filed late and is really focused on, did you get a personal benefit? Is it about somebody that's before you? So maybe we take another look at the streamline regs and say, well, should there be more included in the streamline program because of the exclusions that we have that are ironclad. So I agree that we are going to have to open our eyes and see if this discretion that is written in there is sufficient. And also we're going to have to really think about what minimal public harm means. Because as we apply that to these cases, some people think minimal public harm in their local jurisdiction doesn't mean what we think it means, being far away and not having that same impact. So those are the two things that we're really going to have to be focused on to make sure that we can get through the older cases and have sufficient understanding of where we want to go. I also suggest that for warning letters, if it would be a warning letter that you wouldn't get in any other circumstance, but the age of the case and the resources that we need, that maybe we come up with some canned language that's included, that maybe it wouldn't be used as a comparable.
Appreciate that. The other point I wanted to make, a couple of points, but one of the points I wanted to make, it was in response to something Commissioner Baker mentioned about hoping that these have teeth. And I assume all of us share that sentiment. I think the primary way, though, that this commission and future commissions will ensure follow through is through close attention to those quarterly reports. That's why the feedback back to the commission on the steps that are being taken to implement and achieve these goals and approaching it. And now I'm thinking about how enforcement and how you will be approaching it going forward, approaching it as a collaborative process. It's not showing up and saying, I'm sorry, I only got this far in the goals. It's, look, I'm using all these tools. This is where I'm able to get. I need more authority here, or I'm having difficulty here, or how does the commission want us to treat these types of cases? it needs to be an ongoing collaborative process between the commission and the staff as well at the commission meeting. So I think that's the best way that we as a commission ensure implementation, is through being engaged and providing that feedback when we're given the information. And then the other point I wanted to make was in response to what Commissioner Wood said, because I also noticed the comments about red tape. And I guess number one, I would say I don't see deadlines as red tape. I see them as necessary in the legal profession. But I do think that there are other aspects of enforcement procedures that could be streamlined, and that is precisely why on page 4 in little I, there is direction to the enforcement chief and the management team to consider whether there are internal policies and procedures that can be amended or streamlined to improve timely resolution. So nothing in this document is intended to hamstring enforcement, it is intended to empower them to identify inefficiencies and resolve them going forward. So I just want to make that point as well. Sorry, Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. Thank you also for more artfully making my point about it's a collaboration. There's a role for the commission to play in this, as the future goes forward, whoever the commissioners may be, that in getting those reports quarterly and asking the questions and again, advocating for the agency when it's necessary. It's two things beyond that. One, and I guess I'll just put a finer point on it. The paragraph that I was identifying, I do think that cases for which it appears that compliance has happened, it was late, and those are candidates for clearing some of the backlog. And I would almost, I don't know that there's language we need to put in here, but this one commissioner's feedback is, if there are additional cases like that, as we're going forward and identifying ways to catch up with the backlog, the ones where any compliance that could have been done happened, and I would include those as ways to clear the not underbrush, but the backlog. I'd like you mentioned the word amnesty, and I want to understand a little bit more what you're saying, because I did see in the staff comments, there were some proposals to, maybe we do a blanket amnesty for age of cases or otherwise. And I needed a moment to process. My point is that, yes, when I say a case doesn't need to be compromised or shouldn't be compromised, that, there's a compromise that is made in settlements and otherwise, but that, it's still going to be a just resolution. Can you say more, Director Rest, what you were referring to with respect to amnesty may be something that's necessary? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'd like to understand better the point you were trying to make.
Certainly. What I was trying to say is that discretion is going to have to be stretched more. If you are serious about this number, this is the number that you want enforcement to get to. When you look at these older cases and you think of them as sitting, that's not generally what's going on. There are people that are not settling, and they're not settling for a reason, and it's usually money. And so when we're looking at these older cases and we want to get them resolved, and they're lower harm cases that are just clogging up the works, then yes, we're going to have to use more discretion to make the best possible offer that we can in order for these cases to be resolved. And I think that's just the reality of it, because if all of those cases go to hearing, so, we're just looking at the chart of what's open for 2016, 3, 2017, 5, 2018, 105, 2019, 208. And that's not even going into 2021 and 22. And if you're looking at those cases aren't just sitting. Those cases have been worked. Those cases have been tried to be settled. So there's reasons. And so my point is, you're going to get some stipulations where it's going to be a 2018 case, and it's going to be mainline, and it's not going to charge all accounts, and it's going to be a little uncomfortable, but it's going to be the resolution that needs to happen to move that case forward. And I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but that's the reality of the situation.
Well, I appreciate your directness and honesty on that. But and I would say that While that may be true for some of those cases,
Some,
that's
yeah.
not the only way you get a case through. If somebody is not willing to negotiate in good faith, then you file the probable cause report and you take it to hearing and you put your case on and you get the appropriate penalty. If
That's
you
true.
believe in it that strongly.
That's
You
true.
don't settle for pennies on the dollar if you believe in it. So it isn't that every single case is going to have to end up with a compromised judgment like that.
I
don't want-
completely agree. And
That's the some binary choice that we're being presented with.
I completely agree. And the public harm cases will not be compromised like that. The ones that are the violations with the bags of money, the laundering, the things that the commission has identified as their priorities. I'm talking about the older cases that are just somebody that filed their reports late, that don't really want to pay a fine. And so you're going to give them the best offer that you can, because that is not a case you want to spend your resources on going to hearing. I mean, maybe we do, and maybe that's why I'm presenting this so bluntly, because if that's the direction, then we need to know that. So what I'm saying is those are the cases that we're going to put the language in and say, because of resources and the age of these violations and that there's not a great amount of public harm, we're not charging these 4 counts, but we are charging these. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Bob's your uncle.
Mr. Chair, just to finish
Commissioner Baker.
the point on this, I appreciate that very much. And I don't think we're on different points about this. I just heard the word amnesty, which is very different than what your explanation just was. Your explanation was that, we may have some cases that are older, they're low public harm, and we want the commission to be aware of this. That's different than, I just want to say it bluntly, I don't see it amnesty happening on any of the cases that for which it certainly wouldn't be appropriate. And maybe that word just caught my ear a little bit. And
I do like to
would
trigger
just-
people. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, you triggered me, so it's good. And I appreciate that. And again, the cases that are for which compliance has happened, and if those are candidates for settlement, and I'm sure the team already knows that, but I just wanted to give that one commissioner's feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and enforcement staff, I think gaining compliance is sometimes one of the harder parts. You get somebody to pay a streamlined fine, but you're still waiting. I think that's a lot of the intake cases, still waiting for an amendment. So yes, if somebody is in compliance and they're participating in the process, we'll definitely want to prioritize those.
All right. Any other commissioner comment? Commissioner Wood?
This is just a silly factual question that maybe I should know, but when did we become aware that we were going to get 7 new enforcement lawyers?
Well, it's all very secret.
Yes. I don't, Ms. Hahn, what non-secret information can you share with us about the budget process?
Oh, well, I don't want to put anybody in a tough position. I'm just looking at
No,
when these
we
staff
love you,
attorneys wrote their comments. And they wrote in November and they wrote in December. And so I'm just wondering if they were already aware they were getting 7 new ones when they were saying we need more help
Well,
or not.
It's in footnote 1 on page 5.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. But Ms. Hahn can tell us exactly when you became aware of it. In fairness.
So the governor released his budget on January 10th, and that's where the public knowledge is. On January 10th, we were going to get additional 7 positions in the enforcement divisions.
And then the BCPs that Larissa, Ms. Hahn was talking about earlier, we wrote last year. But it's a confidential process that you're not allowed to share.
I gotcha. Okay. No, I'm trying to gauge how the staff feels about this, because I don't know if the information I have, which is these public comments, is based on the most up-to-date information about the kind of support they would have going into this year or not. I'm just reading some frustration and some overwhelm, and I don't want us to add to it. I want us to alleviate it, which I think mostly we are. But it would have been really nice to get even more comment from them, or to at least get your impression on how they feel about this now, knowing that they're getting more support.
I did outreach, speaking to different groups, and then the assistant chief spoke with the attorneys, And so far it's been positive, and they have provided input on how we can move forward and specific suggestions for a not amnesty program, and and how we can actually handle the cases, handle the new structure, and feel supported. But I haven't heard that anyone is upset with the structure or the direction that we're going. But I can't speak for every individual. I'm saying the groups that I've talked to.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
But
I just want,
we
oh, go
also
ahead.
are going-
Actually,
we are going to be calling for public comment as soon as the commissioners are done with their comments. So that's
oh,
another
right.
opportunity. I just wanted to remind you of that as well. Well, hold on. Commissioner Wood, did you have anything further before Commissioner Wilson makes this comment?
No, I just wanted to clarify quickly that I didn't see the deadlines and the kind of internal approval process that I was adopting the staff's language as red tape. I didn't see those as the same thing. I do kind of acknowledge the questions that were put in item 12 in the enforcement attorney input about how the deadlines will be kind of set as an interesting set of questions. But I think that knowing that it can be kind of, it sounds like kind of collaboratively set between the attorney assigned the case and their supervisors, I think makes it feel a lot better. But that is a separate issue. I totally agree with you, Chair Matich, with the kind of red tape and approval process for some of this stuff that seems like it's slowing them down. I am done. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Commissioner Wood. Commissioner
Yeah,
Wilson.
instead of making the statement I was going to make, I'll pose this as a question to Executive Director West. How did the staff team receive the fact that the budget change proposal resulted in 7 additional attorney positions?
If you're asking if I got a thank you card, no. No, I'm sure it was very positive. We didn't speak specifically of the staff improvements.
I'll send you a thank you card after
Thank
today's
you.
meeting.
Well, you already gave me a granola bar, so.
All right. Is there any additional commissioner comment before we turn it over for public comment? All right. Public comment on item 15, the enforcement policy directives. Going once. All right. Well, we appear to have not received any public comment. So is there any further commission questions, Commissioner Baker?
I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for really pushing this, and for after the proposal was made in November, that there was so much solicitation of staff, feedback, and it was very constructive. I appreciated reading all of the memos and background. It was very informative for me as a commissioner, and reminds us of our ability to be supportive and helpful to the staff. And I just want to thank you for continuing and following through on this, and to the staff out there for taking the time to write detailed memos for us to see and to put that in public comment. I know nobody's said this now, but we have read it, and it's been very informative and appreciated by, I'm sure, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Any other commissioner comments? All right. I will then move approval of this item. I think it's important. I think it's going to provide support to the enforcement division, and I look forward to the ongoing collaborative process to ensure that enforcement has the support and the tools it needs to do its job well. Is there a second? All right, Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Matich.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, thank you, everyone. Now proceed to, well, I'm actually going to take item 17 next, which are the executive staff reports. And so let's go ahead and begin with the enforcement division report. Mr. Burton, anything you wish to highlight for us in the enforcement division report?
The only thing Thank you, Chair. The only thing I have to highlight is just the addition of the updated year-end 2022 figures in the various charts that are at the start of our report. Otherwise, it is as submitted.
Thank you. And let me just say, good job today on the Enforcement Division presentation. I appreciate that. Any other questions for Mr. Burton on the Enforcement Division report? All right, as submitted. Thank you. All right. Next, Audits and Assistant Division report. Good morning, Chief Shaw.
Good morning. I'm Shraddha Shah, Chief of Audits and Assistance. My report is as submitted, but I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Chief Shaw? Hearing and seeing none. Thank you, Chief Shaw.
Thank you.
Up next, Mr. Bainbridge, the Legal Division report. Anything you wish to highlight for us?
Per our normal process, I'll just point out, what is that, section F on page 13 lists a miscellaneous decision concerning consultants for CalPERS who all worked for the same law firm that had requested an exemption on their SEI filing to not disclose certain clients whose information was, their representation was not publicly known. So that was granted. The names are there if anyone is interested. I'll try not to mangle them, but we've seen a number of these recently from CalPERS. They hire a number of consultants that file SEIs, and a lot of them, for one reason or another, have interests that they are precluded from disclosing by other laws, either federal or state. So this was just another one of those. Beyond that, I don't have anything to add to what's in the report.
All right, thank you. I had one quick question for you. I know implementation of, and I know it's on the rate calendar, the recent Senate, sorry, I need to find it, Senate Bill 1439 from last year. There's widespread interest in that. Do you have any outreach plan to like the League of Cities, CSAC, other stakeholders before coming back to us with proposed regulatory language?
We have already spoken with the League of Cities. They wanted to have a meeting and provide us some of their information. We're open to hearing from anyone else. My plan at this point is we have drafts in my inbox of proposed regulations. So my thought would be to publish those on the next agenda, which is coming up here pretty soon. And then I think once we have language in place, that will help elicit comments from everyone who's very interested in this change in the law.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Bainbridge on the Legal Division report? Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. On page 12, it mentioned under item C, you mentioned the behest payment training materials. Are these new ones to reflect some of the changes that we made in prior years? Is this a new training?
Yeah, I think it's a new training. I think what is new to the website is we've actually put the training slides up there so people can view the slides themselves. We gave the training, I want to say it was November of last year.
Okay. Yeah, great. And I am very grateful for that. Something I've asked in the past, but I want to just check in again, is if that had been particularly new training, or just because after an election there's many more new local officials, CSAC, League of Cities, school board administrators, or school boards association, like that, do we proactively reach out to them on these and other trainings like behest payment to sort of say, hey, remember we've got this great training here and we really hope you'll, spread the word. I don't know that takes much effort, but it is something that when there are so many more new electeds, it may be helpful. Is that something that we do? And if not, can I encourage it?
The point with the new electeds is a good one. We do reach out to people we know who will be interested. In fact, for this behested payment training, before we did it, we did an email blast to all the different filing officers who we thought might be interested, and whoever we thought, basically anyone we knew who received behested payments, and let them know that the training was happening. So that is something we do commonly, especially when we're aware of who we think will be interested in the new training.
Got it. Well, I'm thinking more as just the those associations for their members, not just the filing officers, but for their members to get an extra poke as, hey, we've got this, we've put great work into it, and it's not a lot of trouble for us to point it to them. That's my only encouragement, but thank you
Yeah,
for
I
that.
sent them a personal invitation on that one, so we can remind them know that that if they have new members, I think that's a good point, that it might be a good time early on in the year to remind them of this training and that they might want to let their new members know about it.
Thanks, Commissioner Baker. Commissioner Wilson?
I just want to add for clarification that at least from what I've heard from people in the political world and legislative world, you guys have done an excellent job. The team has done an excellent job in terms of outreach. I think a lot of people don't realize, and I've been corrected when I said it was 1,100 school boards in the state. An ed consultant I know says, well, no, it's been reduced to only like 1,000. But with 1,000 school districts, close to 500 municipalities, with 100 staff, or approaching 100 staff, I think we do an excellent job in terms of reaching those individuals at the local level in particular. And I think it's also incumbent that filing officers begin to take the responsibility that they have, in their respective roles at the local level or even state level. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate getting that feedback from the field. That's definitely been a point of emphasis for us over the last year and a half or so.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Wilson. Any other questions for Mr. Bainbridge on the legal division report? All right, let's go ahead and move to Administration and Technology Division. Ms. Hahn.
I would like to submit my report as is, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Any questions for Ms. Hahn? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. West, Executive Director Report.
I do have something to add. We did our annual report to the legislature, which has been included in the executive staff reports. We're required to do this as part of the budget bill. Let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions for Ms. West? All right, then I would recommend, commissioners, if you haven't already, take a look at the January 9th, 2023. This is our most recent report to the legislature then, and it's attached to the agenda. All right. With that, is there any public comment on any of the executive staff reports? That is item 17. Hearing and seeing none, we'll move to, actually going to go back to item 1 because my bad, I forgot to call for public comment for items not on today's agenda. So let me pause, correct that error. And is there any public comment for items not on today's agenda?
Yes, this is Dale Helbig. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Appreciate taking the time. It's been very informative listening to you guys work. Appreciate it. In October and November of 2018, Forms 497 showed that the 19th Green OC LLC contributed $320,000 to campaigns of mayoral and city council candidates in the city of Santa Ana. We filed a complaint questioning the legality of these dark money contributions. And as of yesterday, the website listed case number 18-01194 as case open and pending. And as I understand it, there's a 5-year limitation on resolving this, and we're coming close to reaching that 5-year point. You guys also say that the purpose of the Political Reform Act is to promote transparency by ensuring that receipts and expenditures in election campaigns are fully and truthfully disclosed. However, that was not the case. In fact, they filed one of those 497 forms after the election, so no one really knew where that money was coming from. And it did impact 3 out of the 4 candidates that were being promoted by this flyer. One step to accomplish the goals of the Act is to hold these people accountable. And without doing that, the Act really has no teeth, as one of the commissioners mentioned. And the dark money will continue to flow in our city, as it has been for the last 4 years. I would like to know when this case will be presented to the commission for review and determination, because we really don't have information outside of the fact that it's been with the legal team for quite some time now. So I'm hoping that maybe someone can get back to me on it and figure out where we're going from here. So thank you again for your work and your thoughtful consideration on this issue.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment. I think Ms. West can address your request.
Yes, definitely. I'll have someone reach out to you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Any other public comment for items not on today's agenda? Hearing none, we'll proceed then to our final item. This is item 16, commissioner comments and proposed future agenda items. Do any other commissioners wish to identify future agenda items at this time? Hearing and seeing none. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I can move to adjourn.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Wood.
Second.
All right. Ms. Linker.
Commissioner Baker,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Manich.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.